How are you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great episode today. We're going to be talking about 5 common mistakes to avoid in inmate behavior management. Guys, I know there's a lot more than 5, but we don't have all day. So we figured we'd come up with 5 good ones that I think most people will relate to. My guest today is going to be Russ Hamilton. But before I bring him on, just want to let you guys know we have Inmate Manipulation Decoded on the market. This book is available on Amazon. It's used for training all across the country. If you guys haven't read it, please read it. It's a great book, very informative. And the link to this is in the description. We also have How to Succeed in Corrections. This is a bulky one. This is published by Blue 360 Media. If you guys haven't gotten your hands on this, got to get your hands on this, guys. We're just putting information together that will really help you get a kickstart in your career, or if you're going to train somebody, whatever. There's a lot of good talking points in here. That's why this has been, I wrote these books. And again, this book is published by Blue 360 Media. It's loaded with tons of passages, solid knowledge, not just for myself, but others in the profession. And again, the link to that is in the description. And we also have tips for new correctional officers and their supervisors. This is also published by Blue 360 Media. Again, there's just tons of advice in this one as well that partners very well with these 2 books. And again, the link to this is also in the description. And guys, I just finished a quick book, probably about the size of Inmate Manipulation Decoded, probably about 120 pages. That's also probably going to be published by Blue 360 Media, and it's going to be about managing inmate behavior. My goal was to kind of figure out what's in that gap between inexperience and experience, and most of it really does relate to how we manage the inmate population. So I came up with a few chapters that I believe will help you get an understanding, especially if you're new. What's the best route you could take when it comes to managing inmate behavior? But I also think it is a very advanced book. It's not a book that is something you could pick up, read once, and get all the thoughts from. This book is going to have to be revisited multiple times. Hopefully, if it gets in the hands of good field training officers, they'll be able to translate some of those lessons. But we really covered a lot in that book. Trust and believe, and hopefully that book will be out soon. And again, it's probably going to be a little book like this, but it'll be published through Blue 360 Media. So I'm excited for that. I really am. Took me about 5 or 6 days to write that book, but I worked pretty hard. But here's the great thing about it, guys. Once you have experience, it just comes out. It just nonstop. And my family gave me a chance just to kind of feel the flow. They didn't stop me. And then I just read it all out. It's a little rough right now. That's why it's getting edited. But I knew when it was done. I knew when my thoughts were done, and that's it. I just knew that that's all we need to get out there at this point. And hopefully that manages a little bit of that gap. Let me get Russ in. What's up, Russ?
Anthony, how you doing, sir?
Good, brother. Hey, you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Of course. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer, and I currently work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work through a local county jail and a county probation department where I am a case manager.
And Russ, how's Keepers of Chaos going?
Hey, so on Keepers, we're at about 6,200 members right now. Keepers of Chaos is great. Anyone working in corrections in any part of the field of corrections should come on over there and check it out. We have a huge, supply of professionals there who really do want to help people and, be able to get answers to their questions, do training, do mentoring, and, the history of corrections in general. It's just the best site out there, bar none. No other corrections forum out there on Facebook even comes close.
And I 100% agree. I'm going to be retired in the next couple of years, possibly end of 2027 or the first couple of months of 2028. So I think me and Russ one day could really start looking at a lot of the videos that we put together and see what we could break into some training. I think inmate behaviors could be one. We got manipulation, we got management, we got so many things that we could cross into training. And then again, Russ will get his book out eventually on complacency as well. But having said that, Russ, I mean, these things could easily break into PowerPoints and we could have presentations. I think that's pretty cool, so just be on the lookout for those things, because I think eventually that's what we're going to wind up doing, because it looks like we've geared more towards really giving out good, solid advice for the people who watch this channel. All right, so guys, the topic here is 5 common mistakes to avoid in inmate behavior management. Now, guys, this isn't a catch-all, because at the end of the day, there's a lot more than just 5 common mistakes. I'm sure right now there's a lot of angry frontline staff who believe that inmates are extremely favored, but we didn't want to go with just the obvious. What we did was we came up with 5 common mistakes that we may not be aware that we are doing. And having said that, Russ, I mean, it's hard to do a show that will cover every common mistake being made when it comes to inmate management. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, and we also have to be cognizant of people's limited time and factors like that, as well as just being able to break down the most important, the most salient parts of any particular subject.
Right. We should. It's hard for us to do that. We should do that more often. All right. So I came up with point 1, 3, and 5. Russ came up with point 2 and 4. So I'll go first with number 1. So giving an inmate what they want because it's more convenient. Me and Russ have touched on this before. You definitely see this a lot with juveniles who tend to be very persistent, which winds up, it's kind of like an effort from them to wear staff down. So staff wind up just getting annoyed by it. And then eventually what happens is staff tend to give in because they don't want to be bothered by that inmate again. So the staff either seek to avoid that inmate, or when it's happening and the inmate's just persistent, the staff will look to escape and just think that they can give the inmate what they want instead of holding their ground and preparing for that conflict, preparing for that, being ready to say no. And there's also another time where staff may wind up giving the inmate what they want because it's more convenient. The other time I've seen it is when there's pressure. Let's say normal operations, and you got to run normal operations, whatever it is, and you got an inmate that's just being disruptive. I think we get the pressure of having to run normal operations where we wind up starting to negotiating and compromising our correctional objectives just to wind up moving forward with operations. With that said, guys, it's it's never a good thing to fall on either negotiating correctional objectives, because we don't do that, or compromising, because once you look to settle a concern because it becomes more convenient to do so, the problem is that's where the Pandora box starts to open. That's where you start to see it growing and growing and growing. It goes way past the moment. I've seen people that are so short term that they're willing to give the inmate what they want in the moment and thinking that, okay, well, that will be it for it. And what you don't realize is that's just going to exponentially grow, not just from the one inmate who's a problem, but from every other inmate who's watching it. So I thought that was definitely something that I do see people kind of falling into. They fall into what's more convenient, and then they wind up giving the inmate something that they're really not supposed to have, or they wind up caving in. I think that was the word you used before. Correct, Russ?
Yeah, it's very alluring to just think, hey, you know what? If I give this inmate what they want, or I give them a piece of what they want, or I do something to pacify them, that I can just pass that buck on to the next shift. And although that's alluring and you want a moment's peace, you got to think about what your long-term strategies are. It's not just about, the convenience of the moment. It has to be in the interest of the safety and security of the facility long term. And so just, making a bunch of inmates, dependent on the expediency of what you can do for them at the moment, it's not good. It's not a workable strategy. It's not a good tactic. And so, you want to put them off and not give them and just cave in when you may not even understand, the final game that they're trying to play on you. It may be that, or it just may be, you're going to do something that's maybe going to slightly impact safety and security. But don't just give into that and just think, oh, you know what, if I can just get them, off of me, no longer breathing down my neck, then I'll be able to have some peace and some safety. And it never really works out that way because, like Anthony said, what's going to happen is you're just going to have a bunch of inmates that are going to redouble their efforts because they see, oh, he caved to that one. Now I'll get him to cave to me. And then it just becomes, a self-fulfilling thing where it's difficult for you to pull that back in. And it's one of those things that, we talk about consistency a lot. If we're consistent and we make things difficult for the inmates, and I mean difficult in the way of, getting an answer or of obtaining something that's not clear whether they should get or could get because of their past or some other issues. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't just be caving, because if we cave all the time, then we're just putting ourselves into a position where we're going to be complacent in the way we view what inmates are trying to achieve. And we should never do that.
Yeah, and guys, you may not see this as an aggressive attempt either. It could be also what you passively allow because you don't want to be bothered. You got little things happen in the unit and it's just, I'm too tired. I'm working overtime and, I don't care about the tattooing today or whatever it is. And I feel when we talked about pressure, one is, pressure of operations we talked about are just normal running. But I also think the pressure of coercion. The fact that, I guess I'll just call my lawyer. It's like, man, I'm just not beat to be put in any of this at this point. So, and guys, inmates are aware of that. They're aware that, sometimes it's not that we're afraid for them to call their lawyer, because if we're doing something right, they can call whoever they want. But sometimes we may feel it's that extra bother that we just want to avoid. And I think that's the key here. The key when it comes to the staff who tend to give inmates what they want because it's more convenient. If you look deeper into it, it's probably because they themselves are looking to avoid something and they just don't have the energy for it. And as I said, even for the operations, why can't we just run things normally? Now what's going to wind up happening is that, we're going to be backed up. The facility's going to be running late. We're going to have all this paperwork. So you tend to want to smooth things over, because if you don't, the pressure on the outside of that situation tends to be very frustrating. So again, I think those that look to act more convenient, Russ, tend to do it because in the long run, they could be trying to avoid or escape something that just adds to the day that they just don't have any energy for at that point. But Russ, could you think of, before we go to the next one, any other pressures that could cause staff to maybe act on convenience as opposed to really doing what's correct?
Well, a lot of it can, just be the buildup of what our little daily chores are. We have things that we have to get done. We have counts. We have, any number of reports. We have the general running of the unit, the operational needs, as you mentioned before. And then, there's just the pressure sometimes of, you have some things going on at home and you start to feel overwhelmed. Maybe this is your, second, third, or fourth mandatory in the past month, or maybe sometimes in the past week. And all of those things make you vulnerable to that, that little bit of, release manipulation that, hey, just go ahead. Go ahead, do it. I give you permission. And that kind of, takes one more thing off of your plate, and it feels good to be done with it. And then because it feels good to be done with it, you are probably not going to revisit it in your mind to see whether or not you actually made a good decision or not, because you're going to assume that you made a good decision because it feels so good to not have to deal with that inmate anymore.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then you wind up revisiting when the domino effect occurs.
Yeah.
Now you got multiple inmates down the wrong wing, or multiple inmates, eating in the public area. I mean, most of the time, be honest with you, the convenience of it all is usually in-house minor rules that they're looking to try to circumvent. Because that's when we may feel it's more convenient to, because don't forget, Russ, with discretion, especially if you're more experienced, how you utilize discretion. I mean, are you utilizing it for a greater purpose, or are you utilizing it because it's more convenient for you to go this route? And I think that's where people wind up misunderstanding the power of discretion. Some people use discretion, but ultimately there's an end game in mind, something more long-term. And some people utilize discretion because it makes their day easier. But in the long run, it's going to make their day and someone else's day longer or harder. But would you agree with that, Russ? This kind of falls with the smaller employment of discretion and which way you're going to lean with it?
Yeah, but you can also just look at it like, okay, you let something get a little bit out of bounds, and that's cool for right now. But as these things start to pile up, and then your whole unit starts to, spin out of control, and then you can't get it back because you already said yes, or getting it back comes at a premium because we have to, we have to go in there and we have to be harder and faster and meaner, and maybe, end up with an incident package or something like that. Don't put yourself in that position where you can't win it all back. And that's really what, what I think, it comes down to is, be careful about those yeses. They have to be judicious, and they have to earn you something back in return.
I love that. It's funny. It's like, oh, well, I can't believe you're telling us no, Russ. You're such a nice guy, and you want to avoid being the bad guy. So you wind up saying yes. And what's the purpose of that? It has nothing to do with the running of the facility. It's more about your own vanity or pride. And inmates know that, by the way, just so you know, before we get to number two. Inmates will play into that all day because they know one thing that sometimes staff may gear towards more than the running of a facility is how they perceived. The staff may, want to be perceived in a certain way, and hopefully it's always being professional. But if inmates start pulling you out of that prescribed role and they start kind of talking to you and not really your position, they could play with you a little bit on that. They could play with you a little bit on that. In an effort to be that nice person, the effort to not want to be seen as the bad guy. So we want to avoid being the bad guy. We wind up acting in more of a convenient manner. And it's amazing how this could wind up being a dialogue in itself. But again, it's enough to give you guys some momentum if you guys want to kind of see where that thought goes. Now, Russ came up with this one, and this is extremely important as well. Failing to protect your reputation. So mind you guys, the title for this is 5 common mistakes to avoid in inmate behavior management. So Russ, failing to protect your reputation.
So whether you like it or not, you have a reputation in doing what you do inside the correctional setting. That reputation, it might be a pretty good one from our perspective, but it might be viewed differently than the inmates as a whole. And so when you are not being, consistent in the way that you run things, and that if you constantly or regularly don't do what you say, be it a positive or be it a negative, you're losing ground right then on being able to manage that population. If you have inmates that are, acting a fool or whatever, and you say, just see what happens next. Some inmates are going to go, man, we just have to ignore him because he's not going to get up out of that chair. He's not going to do anything. That's a bad part of reputation to have. That's something that's going to allow things to fester and develop. And eventually, you're going to be, having all kinds of problems inside the unit. That reputation is something you should jealously guard, and you should, make sure that you enforce it every chance that you get so that they know that there's a consistency. But that consistency can't just be, oh, I'm constantly laid back. Oh, I'm constantly not going to do what I said I was going to do. They have to be assured in their mind that when you tell them something, it's going to happen. If it's a positive thing, hey, that's cool from their perspective. If it's a negative thing that you're telling them that's going to happen, well, you know what? They already knew you were like this. And when they have to reap the whirlwind of what they've done, when they get held accountable because you said you were going to do it, then it's not a surprise to them. And so I think that, reputation, like I said, those words, guard it jealously. Always make sure that your reputation is being enforced and reinforced.
Yeah, I'll add something on that too, Russ, because that's 100% true. I would also like to mention that the reputation that you're looking to guard, like Russ said, is your professional reputation. Inmates, again, as we discussed before, will try to pull you out of your professional role, and they will try to mess with the identity in which you seek to have a reputation with. So, having said that, the number one priority is having a reputation in that professional role, the job that you do. It's not having a reputation, like mentioned before, as being the nice guy or all these other things. It's not. It's about doing the professional role, because outside of just the inmates, having a reputation with the inmates, you want to have a better reputation with your staff. I mean, that's the key. So, like, with that said, is if I have a reputation of being consistent, that's great. If I have a reputation of being a person of my word, that's great. But if I'm seeking a reputation of always being that nice guy, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be something where the inmates are going to be able to mess with, and they're going to see that. And I truly do believe this, Russ. I'd love to get your opinion on this, because maybe later on when we evolve some of the books we got, or maybe I write another one, I think it really does matter in what type of reputation that you seek, because the inmates would love to make that reputation a personal one and pull you away from the professional reputation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the, that's one of the things that I see, when I'm out there in some of the forums, that just kind of, makes me roll my eyes a little bit when I'll hear, an officer will say something about, well, the inmates in my building respect me. And, I always just think, well, what does that even mean, that they respect you, that they've told you that they've given you that so that they can, get over on you in some undefined way that we can't possibly know about. Maybe you can't even possibly know that. So, when we're throwing words around and stuff, I think we want to be really careful about, how we view ourselves. I would never internally want to seek a reputation of the inmates based on them respecting me, because that respect is never two-way. As soon as you start getting, out of pocket on them and doing things that hold them accountable, that so-called respect immediately evaporates. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that they were just paying you compliments. They weren't actually giving you any respect. So there's a huge gap between compliments and respect, and what we do to maintain our reputation. There is a reputation as perceived by the inmates, but there's our own internal reputation, how we see ourselves, and we should seek to be honest with ourselves. And our reputation internally should reflect, the values of the oath that we took.
Yeah, and let's be honest. If you're seeking compliments, you might as well just seek approval to do your job. That's just pretty much what it comes down to. If I'm seeking to be the most popular, then ultimately I'm pretty much giving the inmates permission to tell me how to roll. I don't know, Russ, if I ever, because you made a good point, man. I'm trying to think in my career, did I ever see myself wanting to be that nice guy, or the perspective of the nice guy? And I definitely think it could happen. I definitely know there were attempts, but I think I know me, and I know that the professional role I had always superseded any personal feelings that I knew could make me vulnerable towards manipulation, because I had that one incident I wrote in my book at the very beginning of my career. So I was lucky. I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. Sometimes when you're a rookie and you are insightful, sometimes it's good if they try to employ a game on you real quick, and then you can kind of start the momentum of knowing what type of world that you're in. But I do think the shift for that would be is if I was looking to be popular, and inmates were kind of pushing towards that, I could actually picture myself thinking like, nah, not going to do that, because the moment I go to do something, like Russ said, that's why I want to kind of revisit what Russ just said, out of pocket, I'm going to wind up now being controlled by the inmate to get back in pocket. So, but I do know that happens because I know it happens because I know the inmates play that route. That was a good one, Russ. I appreciate that. That was a good one. That's a whole topic in itself. Not holding inmates to specifics when they have a concern. And again, this is really more about trying to speed through an interview process or whatever it is. And basically, you note the concerns at a very specific level, and you don't wind up, really digging in and asking, the main specifics: who, what, when, where, and maybe why. But more importantly, if you were threatened, who threatened you? What, when did it happen? Where did it happen? What did they exactly say? I know a lot of people kind of look to speed things through. They get the generality, but the problem is, if you get the generality, it makes it very hard for people at the higher levels to review the matter and look for specifics in order to either support the concern or negate it. So having said that, even when dealing with inmates, just on a one-on-one or whatever it is, if they have a concern, I'll listen at first, but then I'm going to go back and ask them extremely specific questions to try to draw or discern what the actual issue is. But also, on another note, what actions do I have to take? I mean, I have seen in my career where you need specific information, as let's say you're higher up and you need to get specific information from an inmate or whatnot, and people just go there, they collect the information and they pass it up, and it's just very general. And it's like, I can't do anything with that. Then you got to wind up sending it back down and having the inmate re-interviewed. And then the other part of that all, the reason why people may not want to hold the inmates to specifics at that level could be because they know if the inmate does provide more specific concerns, it could open up a Pandora's box for them, and where they have to act and now start doing something at that ground level instead of waiting for it to be deferred and come back down. So having said that, very big thing here. Go for specifics. Please go for specifics. Don't let inmates talk around in circles. Russ, you've got to be a big fan of that. We've discussed this. We've done whole shows on this.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've brought up what I call circle talking, where I'm, interviewing an inmate, I'm asking him something. It might be an investigation that I'm doing. It might be something that's, within the range of the moment. Hey, where do you live? And when you have an inmate that, starts answering you with something that you didn't ask them, they're trying not to be specific. They're trying not to be general, and they're trying to, do an end around you. And I can't tell you how many times, I've started with that, asking them where they live, and they tell me instead where they're going or who they want to see. Because they already know that they're probably not supposed to be out where they are, and that they don't have permission to be there, or that they just simply don't want you to know who they are or what they're actually doing. And so get specific with these guys. I always start, by nailing them down. Hey, what's your name? Where do you live? What's your number? And then what is it? Who are you trying to see again? And make them tell you. And don't let them circle talk around it. And this is actually, it may not sound like much, but actually when you're trying to manage a unit, when you're trying to, steer, this massive concern, however many people are in your building, 250 or whatever it is, holding them down to specifics and keeping people from getting to and being places that they shouldn't, and talking to people that they shouldn't be talking to people, and rocking the boat in ways in which it's not designed to be rocked, is really super important. There's a process that we have to hold these guys to, and they have to be accountable for trying to act outside the bounds of that. So no specifics, no go, And the first thing I always say, and this is a more tactical thing on my part, is any inmate that I'm talking to, instantly, I want to see your identification card. I want to hold that in my hand while I'm talking to you. That way, there's never any idea in their mind about when the interview is over. because the interview is over when I give that back to you. Until then, you do not have permission to walk away from me. And if you think that you have permission to walk away from me, then we'll end up in bracelets or whatever else that this requires. And this is just one of the ways that you do manage these populations of inmates, is that you nail them down to those specifics.
Yeah, and Russ, I had a thought too when it comes to the specifics. I think the convenient aspect here, on another note, could be that when you start pushing for specifics from the inmate, there's going to be a challenge. There's going to have to be follow-up by you. So it does stretch the interview out to a lot longer than the quick 2 minutes and here, write a statement. It's going to be a little bit of a back and forth. You write the statement, or the inmate writes the statement, you read it and say, I'm sorry, it doesn't say when, where, whatever, add that stuff. And then read, I'm sorry, this doesn't make any sense. It really does become a full-blown interview at that point when you pull it to specifics and then have the follow-up. And then, when at the higher level, when you're giving those interviews, you see the exhausted effort, and then you're able to go ahead and make a decision based on what is in front of you and not a generality. I mean, I think a lot of times people believe that inmates get what they want every time they cry wolf. But then when you look at what is being presented to the higher level management, it could be just an incomplete interview. Not all the time, but in some cases where it's like, I could send it back down and have the person interviewed. But even management may say, I just don't want to go through this right now. Now we're acting out of convenience. And next thing you know, we just kind of give the inmate what they want because it just becomes too much of a hassle to revisit the concern, or maybe bring that supervisor in and hold them accountable for whatever that the interview was, the outcome of the interview. Hey, Russ, real quick, when you talked about reputation, would you say part of the convenience of that is because we talked about trying to maintain your word, whatever it is. Do you think part of the convenience of that would be is if you are wrong, hypothetically, and you have to go back and correct it, you think part of the convenience is avoiding that?
Well, it could be. I would just say that in situations like that, I mean, I would not worry about that. Your reputation as viewed by the inmates is going to be one thing. The internal reputation that you view of yourself is another. And so the one that you burnish, the one that you polish, the one that you try and make into your ideal is always that one that you hold of yourself. So, so you're not gonna do anything negative to yourself by holding your own self accountable. Do you make mistakes? Do you write the wrong inmate up sometimes, by accident? Do you are there times where maybe you've held them too accountable or made a mistake in identifying a suspect? Yeah, that kind of stuff happens because, we're human. So, just know that, as long as you're pushing ahead forward, and as long as, you're trying to do the things that are right and correct, by policy, procedure, state law, case law, federal law, and your own sense of morality, man, I wouldn't sweat that a bit.
Yeah, I like that. And I thought it was a good question because I wanted to make sure we covered the convenient part of the reputation. Now, Russ also mentioned, and this is for the higher levels, undercutting the authority of your staff. So Russ, you want to break that down? And Russ, let me ask you a question, Russ. Also, if you could maybe also put that in the framework of, how that action is more convenient.
So there are pressures that are felt by supervisors from the inmate population that, a lot of staff may not be aware of, because what happens is, we get the gripes that come up from the bottom, right? And we also get the gripes that come down from the top. And so in the middle of all that is a sandwiching effect. And so sometimes, for some supervisors, it's just easier for them to pass the ball by going ahead and, now, you know what, I'm going to give you all that stuff that staff took back, regardless of what it is, regardless of the reason that they took it, just so they don't have to, answer on, verbally or on paper or whatever, to somebody that's above them. And that's a bad tactic. It's a worse yet, it's a bad strategy because of all the places those things can lead. If you want staff to really, have your back, be watching out for you, and to get them to view your reputation as sterling, the one thing that you can really do is you give them full authority over the inmates until they do something where that type of, final say so is no longer warranted. And so, when I look at that, the first thing I used to tell an inmate, when he was approaching me is I would ask them, do you have permission to talk to me from your officer, from your housing officer? And then they always say, well, no, but no, go back and get permission from him. And that did two things: is that would force the inmate to have to deal with the officer and take me out of the equation altogether. I don't want to be there unless my officer needs me to be there. And then it would also force the officer to have to render a decision. And hopefully, that decision is made better by the fact that he knows that I have his back, and by the fact that he knows that final authority rests with him. And so when we're talking about, managing big groups of inmates and so forth, that's key, because people who believe that they have your trust and backing are less likely to misuse their authority, especially if that comes along with a good helping dollop of training and then some modeling for them. You can model for them the way you want them to handle the inmate population, because sometimes you do have to take over for them and show them what to do, or at least piece together what the best way is to talk to that inmate and to find that solution. So I'm real big on that, giving the final authority in every case possible that you can back to your staff. And that's really key, because if everybody is on that page and they know that they have the authority, they're not trying to do things to placate the inmate population that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and guys, when I see this, like, frontline obviously is going to have a lot of interactions with inmates. I mean, that's their main function. As you move up, it does start to limit a little bit more, because you're, you got stuff in between, so frontline probably have the most interaction. Sergeant or second level up, the a little bit less. Lieutenant or next level up, a little bit less, whatever. And then definitely when you get to administration, a lot less. Now, I think it becomes easier to perceive relationships, not saying undue, but hear me out, relationships that are a little bit closer than they should be, the more the person starts to move higher up. Because having said that, when you're a supervisor, I would like to think for the most part, it's quick and to the point with the inmates. If there's a concern, what's the concern, blah, blah, blah. And then really trying to do whatever you can, like Russ said, to really create that momentum back with the officer or that frontline professional to deal with that concern. Again, it's an effort to show support, but you don't want to be seen as that savior. The inmate savior, because every time you go in, they're going to come up to you, and you're going to wind up being this person who you become this person that the inmates know they can circumvent policy and procedure with. But with that said, I truly do think that when you watch these interactions with, let's say, the higher ups, it's funny how where certain people, they'll come in, let's say I'm a sergeant. Inmate Russ is coming up to me, and I don't really know inmate Russ, and I'm stern with Russ. A, B, C, D. What did the officer say? Nope, that's, this is what you're going to do based on what the officer said, blah, blah, blah. Any further questions, go talk to officer whatever. But then you get other inmates who that supervisor could have better rapport with, and now it's more negotiation. It's no longer the professional, hey, go back and talk to your officer, but more of a negotiation where it's like the person now that has the authorities kind of weakened it a little bit. And then sometimes you may even see them come back around to the officer and saying, hey, I know you had an issue with Russ today, blah, blah. And I've seen officers go back and say, well, the same issue was with issue Jones the other day. You didn't come back and talk to me about Jones. Now you want to talk to me about Russ. I've also noticed another thing is when people move up, sometimes they don't disconnect themselves to some extent from the inmates they used to directly supervise. I'm no longer your housing unit officer anymore. So having said that, I'm now the sergeant. Yeah, but when you ran it, it doesn't matter. I'm not your housing unit officer anymore. I'm the next level up. So you can't keep coming to me when you have a problem. You have the officer that you can talk to, because a lot of inmates will take advantage of the fact that same thing as, know your roots, remember your roots. Inmates could play that game too. Russ moved up, but he used to be my area supervisor or used to be my officer. Now he's a sergeant. When Russ comes in, I'll talk to him because he was my officer for 5 years. And then Russ comes in and, hey, Russ, what's going on? Hey, Gange, how you doing? But, oh, yeah, don't worry. I'll talk to officer such and such. And it's like, no, you're no longer the sergeant. You're no longer the officer that runs the unit. You're the sergeant. And you got to put that layer in the middle between you and that inmate at that point. Would you agree with that, Russ? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is, just be cognizant of what your role actually is, and understand that there's a point at which the actions that you take can undercut your officers. The actions that you take can bolster and support your officers, and so always choose that second option there whenever it's possible. Are there times where you're going to have to get involved in things and perhaps rewind, so to speak, some of the decisions they've made? Sure, but you're going to do that in as covert a manner as possible, so that the officer is able to go back in there and face the inmates in a way that he doesn't feel like they're going, yeah, man, we got the sergeant to tear him a new one. No, that's not what you want. You're not trying to do things for the inmates. You're trying to do things for your facility, for your oath, and for those officers. And so the times that you have to switch directions and you have to step in and undercut them in ways that aren't designed to be undercutting them, but only have to, be done in order, in order to bring policy and procedure back online, is the only time that you should be doing those. And other than at those times, man, I'll tell you what, those officers should be running the show, and they should be, taking up the full mantle of their authority and running with it. No hesitancy on their part. And so, when you treat them right, and you've done all these things, those people are gonna almost in every case not only make the right decision, but make great decisions that makes you look good, in the eyes of the administration and whatnot, and that are safer and more secure and more effective for what you're trying to do, because there's no one right way to run a unit. It's all a mishmash of a collection of different experiences, and people that have the backing to make their experience work for the particular incident or concern at hand is going to take you a long ways.
Yeah, and the last one is negotiating with inmates when they're unruly. I have the book that I have coming out soon about managing inmate behavior. The chapter 5, there's 6 chapters. Chapter 5 kind of discusses the de-escalation versus negotiation, respond versus resolve. And I think this plays out very well in what we're going to be talking about here. So when it comes to unruly inmates, I mean, I look at 2 things. One is I look at their behavior, and then 2, I look at the situation that's around me. With that said, that behavior could also impact the situation. So when people say to de-escalate the situation. That's exactly what it is. It's de-escalating the situation. If the person starts to pose a threat, then I'm not going to look to resolve the issue. I am going to look to respond to the issue. I don't believe in negotiating with inmates that aren't acting proper because, one, you feed into the attention that they're seeking. So therefore, they will keep on using that as a way to manipulate your attention, just to kind of talk about nothing, if that's the case, or maybe how they feel that they're being ignored when it just wasn't the answer that they wanted. Or on the other level, you just wind up opening that Pandora's box where all the inmates see that's the best way to get attention. I know there's a lot of inmates that may have a concern. They want to speak directly to admin, so they act out, and then they say, I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing until admin comes down. And it's like, yeah, admin's not going to come down, because we're not going to reward that behavior, because at the end of the day, one, that circumvents all the people that are there before admin, which is a sergeant, a lieutenant, whatever that chain of command has to be. And then it just feeds that want for attention that the inmate is seeking. Because again, you're doing it, and it could be in the middle of a unit. So with that said, sometimes when people make an effort to de-escalate, and you really watch what they're doing, they're not de-escalating, they're negotiating. So I love what me and Russ have discussed before, that when you de-escalate, you're de-escalating the situation, which could even mean just responding to it, not resolving it, but just responding to it, making sure that you have the control in your hands. When I believe people tend to go from de-escalation to negotiation, maybe because, let's say, it's dragging out and there's the pressure of operations or whatever it is, where the person's looking more to resolve the issue and basically speed things through as opposed to actively respond. The problem is down at this point here is that you wind up giving out a level of control, because even in the effort to negotiate, one, we already know you can't negotiate correctional objectives. And you can't compromise, right? We don't even like the term compromise staff. So you can't compromise. So even if you make an effort to negotiate, now think about this, guys, you're making it on their terms. It's not your terms, it's their terms. That's why at the end of the day, de-escalation is just, I truly do believe, is more of giving directives and seeing if the inmate is going to comply with the directives. And if not, prepare for the response. In the book I wrote here that's coming out, yes, obviously there could be a chance where there's a chance to de-escalate, of course, and that's what we're talking about when there's, you're trying to minimize the threats. But once the threat has risen, to be honest with you, and maybe Russ could add on this, but I definitely wrote this in my book, de-escalation is not even part of it. If anything, it's a distraction so you can get ready to respond. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
These are the kind of things where I think that some of the terms that we've selected or chosen to endorse, can come back and bite us. And that's one reason why I specifically try and think of the de-escalation is giving the inmate a choice to follow orders or not. And that's the limit of it. I'm going to, get down or I'm going to spray you. To me, that's de-escalation. I don't feel like, we should be there. Come on, guys, come on, stop fighting. Is that really where we want to go with it? How long are we going to carry those things out? Are we going to let the incident become protracted in a manner that can cause further or more severe injuries or death? And so, I think that just the idea about the type of language that we use, I think that we have to be careful, because when it does become a negotiation, then what are we left with? Then we're left with, pretty please, and for me, I don't believe that that's, healthy, advantageous, effective, or does anything to, bolster and strengthen safety and security. So, negotiations definitely not. And, there's a point with unruliness at the point where they actually are becoming unruly, the choice, is no longer it's no longer about what they want. It's just whether or not we're going to resolve this with bracelets or not with bracelets. And so, if some people think that that's harsh or it's too time limiting or whatever, well, they've never been in some of the situations that I've been in where, wringing our hands and saying pretty please makes everything worse. Decisive, immediate action wins the day almost every single time, in my opinion, for what that's worth.
No, it's 100% on point. I think this is a topic that we will. It's definitely discussed in the book. I actually borrowed a quote that Russ said in a prior show that I added in the book, where it's basically, once this decision has been made, it's about time we show support. The quote, actually, let me read the quote real quick because it really is a good quote. I don't know if you remember saying it, Russ, but I took it from the episode that we had from Deescalation, and I kind of ended the chapter with it. And basically, you said right here, I love it. It says, with that said, I would like to add a quote from Russ Hamilton, retired sergeant from CDCR. I feel this quote of support for what is needed when it's needed brings this chapter to full circle. In one of my Tier Talk episodes, Russ Hamilton once said, I don't think that we should be saying things like, did you try de-escalation? When what we really mean is, did you try and avoid use of force? We're not always in a position to know what the best possible solution is. So we have to be paid for our judgment. We have to be paid for the risk we are going to take. We have to be paid to have a good mindset so we can mitigate those risks. And when the situation calls for a response and we have to make that final determination, are we going to de-escalate or are we going to use force? And it happens to go, and if it happens to go on the side where we had to use force, we need to be able to back those people up. Hold on, I got to change it to it. We need to be able to back those people up. We need to give them a chance to explain what they did and why they did it. We don't need to second guess them. We need to try and support them. What we have to do is train people to use force. We have to train people to think tactically, act strategically, and do their best as human beings and the professionals they are to render that solution. And whatever that solution may be, if they've done their best according to their training, we shouldn't ask more from them than that. And that was in one of your segments on the channel. And guys, I want to add something. The convenient side of it all here is more to the amount of work that happens on the back end of what could be a use of force situation if the inmate is not willing to comply with orders. So a lot of times staff will try to negotiate with an unruly inmate way past the need to do so. Now you got to start responding. And sometimes I feel people will deal with an unruly inmate and they mix respond and resolve at the same time. And then when you kind of look at it and you kind of ask them like, hey, you guys should have responded a little while ago. Why are we doing it now? And most of the time it's because they don't want the paperwork that's behind it. Sometimes they're hoping that it could come to a more peaceful resolution, but I don't want us to hold on to that either. If the moment comes where you got to respond. And like Russ said, the people above should show support in that, because you don't want to negotiate during unruly behavior, because if the resolution comes during that negotiation, people are going to see the resolution coming at the back end of unruly behavior. One of the things I learned years ago, guys, we're talking about within the first couple of years of me being in this profession, was that if an inmate's acting unruly, you don't even care at that point what it is that they want. We'll talk about it when you're on my terms, when everything is calmed down, because again, I'm not going to sit there and have dialogue with you when you pose a threat or we're in a situation that could be threatening, like doing this in an open dorm. You know, imagine being in an open dorm and you got an inmate that's trying to while out. Do you think I'm looking to resolve that, or do you think we're going to respond? Because at the end of the day, I don't want this inmate on a pedestal here, you know, grandstanding for everyone else to see and then show support. And now instead of it's being this, one inmate that's a problem, now we got to worry about every other inmate that's around that's going to feel justified or validated. But Russ, I mean, before we come to a close, Russ, I mean, I think that's the concern now, as I think the concern, how we tactically see the word de-escalate should be really the situation itself. I think a lot of people from the outside, when they look in, they look at de-escalation as the person. And it's no, the person is part of the situation. So having said that, when I look to de-escalate the situation, the person's part of it, which means that if they pose to be a threat, then we go in and we respond. I mean, it's that simple. And I feel that a lot of people from the outside looking in also see the de-escalation attempt as negotiation, because what they see is they may see cops doing this in the streets. They also don't realize that there's unlimited time for those on the streets, where in prison doesn't work that. You have the pressure of time the moment it happens. I mean, it's just this facility's got to keep moving. Time is not on our side, but they see like people on the outside trying to negotiate with people that are being disruptive. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, that's great. That may work out there, but here that doesn't work, because again, it opens up that Pandora's box. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say this is, if you look even though at what some outside agencies do or have done, and you've seen them, lose the tactical initiative when they're doing something where they have officers that are just constantly doing nothing but talking to individuals who they haven't searched yet. They don't know if they have a gun. They let it go on endlessly. If you've ever watched some of the some of these videos where you have officers who are just backing up and backing up and backing up, and never trying to bring the incident to a conclusion, and then suddenly something happens and the guy's able to take a hostage. Then there's a lot to be said for immediate action, and giving that person the chance to stop what they're doing or not is all the de-escalation that's necessary, in my opinion. Now, I know that not everyone shares that, but I'm a big proponent of just knowing that the longer you drag something out, the worse it always becomes. I've never seen one time where things got better tactically or strategically for staff when you draw things out. Now, that's not to say that I've seen every situation or I know everything that goes on, but I'm just saying you should be careful about those situations where you allow things to drag on, and then that person is able to identify maybe where they have a weapon stash, maybe some weapons that they can use, just a coffee mug or something that they can grab, or they decide that they're going to become so despondent that they're going to try and take somebody's life in that instant. So I just say that I just think that we got to be careful about buzzwords, and de-escalation. If I were going to pick two buzzwords right now that I would want to be careful of, it would be de-escalation and respect.
When I took training on negotiation, one of the things that as a negotiator is you want the peaceful resolution. And that goes for both sides, believe it or not. Let's say there is a hostage situation. The negotiator may be tied up and also wanting a peaceful resolution for the person that's taken the hostage. They don't want it. They don't want anybody to be killed. So they want to look for a peaceful resolution as best they can without people getting hurt. But then there's the tactical side where they're coming in and their priority is to save lives. So when there's a risk, The tactical side is going to be thinking one thing, and the negotiator side is thinking another, and these two may not communicate. The negotiator and the tactical side usually don't communicate because the tactical side doesn't want the negotiator to kind of accidentally give out hints of when they are going to actively respond. So sometimes the negotiator actually is shocked when the ending doesn't go peaceful. But again, the tactical side automatically knew that something was happening. They couldn't wait. And then sometimes you see the negotiators, it's not their fault because, again, they're looking for that peaceful resolution. They're trained to do that, is they get frustrated. But then later on, when they kind of get to know a little bit more of what's going on, they start to understand what it, where it was going into. But a lot of people don't realize there's a good partnership between them because the negotiator technically is really just buying time. They're buying time. So just in case you got to go in effectively, you got to go in effectively. However, that translates into the prison wall is we don't have that time. Once you got to go in, you got to go in. And also the likelihood of someone seeing the outcome of someone being disruptive and then wind up saying, hey, that may be the only way I can get attention. So again, if you're going in and the first thing you do is open up negotiation instead of responding, it just opens up a window where you're going to wind up doing it every time an inmate has a concern, and it just becomes very tough to manage. And again, I touched that in the book, not as detailed as I did now, but just enough to let people know that there's a difference between de-escalation, negotiation, respond, and resolve. And I love one more thing that Russ said before we go into closing. The verbiage that we use, we really gotta understand that what we think a word means may not be what exactly it means. Lately, I've been really good at this. I've been like looking at words, and all of a sudden, I'm like, well, I wonder if that means exactly this word, like respond and resolve. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. They shouldn't be used interchangeably. Resolving would be more of a situation or an issue, but respond is going right there and dealing with it. And again, it also how it applies to our profession. Some of the words on the outside that are employed don't apply very well in the profession, in the meaning that we want it to. So again, we have to be able to provide context. So we got to be careful, like Russ said, of how certain words are interpreted, because at the end of the day, the people that are using this verbiage, they could have an agenda behind it. And next thing you know, we think like respond and resolve are the same thing. And the moment we go to respond and we start using the word resolve, we get challenged because, hey, that's not what you did. Yes, we did. We responded, but you're supposed to resolve. They're not the same thing. And it's sad that we don't find that out until our practices get questioned, especially when it comes into what Russ said, the policies and procedures. They'll put the word resolve, and that's the word the courts will challenge when it should be resolve or respond, whatever it is. I'm just bringing up a scenario, but the words you use matter because in a court of law, if there's any interpretation that can go another way, it's going to go the other way. So you got to try to make sure that the verbiage that you utilize is the verbiage that plays out in the world that we work in. Any thoughts on that, Russ, before we go to closing?
Yeah, just gonna say, I think that this was a good dialogue. I think that, the more that you think about, in terms of, the ways that we can impact the inmate population, in ways that make them, more receptive or more malleable, to, good correctional practices where we do things like try and rely on the use of force less, but under the same guise, knowing that everything is backstopped by that use of force. I just hope that people, will take everything that we said under advisement, whether you agree with the things we've said or not, and just know that the real struggle is just being able to think things through and be intentional about what you're trying to do with the inmate population to bring about the results that you want to see. And I hope that makes sense. Not everyone has to agree, but if you're at least intentional and you put good thought into things, you'll be able to do better at managing that population. I do believe.
Yeah, and guys, that's why I tend to write the book that we have coming out, because I think the book is going to fill those gaps of even the discussions we have here. It's great because if when me and Russ have these dialogues, or even with Joe, we try to give you a foundation to filter things from, and I think it really does help you, because when you have to make a decision amongst the unique situations you face, you have a way to filter it. Me and Russ are always, and Joe always working on, even though you may have tons of unique situations, what are the commonalities? And then how do we build generalized commonalities just to have a filter? I think back in the day, people would go into corrections not having a filter, not knowing how pieces connect. And I think that's what we do. We provide pieces, we look at where their commonalities are, and we filter from that. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.